$2. That's all Cassandra Santos had left in her pocket when the letter arrived on a Tuesday in August, heavy cream-colored paper with a law firm's gold-embossed seal in the corner, and inside those words that made her stomach drop like a stone into an endless well, custody hearing, 14 days, $300,000, or relinquish all parental rights. She sat on the edge of her mattress in the dark. The electric bill had come due and she'd had to choose between light and food, and her fingers traced the numbers over and over, as if reading them again would change what they meant. $300,000. 14 days. $2 in her pocket and calloused hands that had scrubbed marble floors 6 days a week for 8 years, and Margaret Harrington, the woman who bankrolled everything Marcus Webb wanted, had made absolutely certain the math was impossible. Outside, the Chicago night pressed against her single window like something alive, the August humidity so thick it felt like breathing through cloth. Thunder rolled across the sky in the distance, that low rumble that made dogs whine and made people press their palms against their chests as if they could hold themselves together. Cassandra held the letter like it was made of broken glass. She didn't cry. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus 5 years ago when Marcus had first decided that her body was his to hurt whenever the mood struck, and she'd learned that the human body runs out of liquid grief like a well runs dry. She had 14 days. In that same moment, 6 miles north, Lucian Russo sat in his private booth at Restaurant Nero, the kind of restaurant where the wine cost more than a month of Cassandra's rent and the men who sat at certain tables didn't ask for bills because the bill was always already paid in invisible currency that had nothing to do with money. The candlelight caught the sharp lines of his face, 42 years old, broad-shouldered beneath an Italian suit that cost $4,000, dark hair swept back from his temples where silver had begun to creep in like frost across winter glass. His eyes were that peculiar shade of gray that made people instinctively look away, and his left hand bore a thin scar that ran from the corner of his eye down to his jaw, a reminder of a night 15 years ago when his father died in the street with a bullet in his throat. He was mid-conversation with Carlo and Theo, his oldest men, discussing a shipment that had gone missing from the harbor when he happened to glance toward the back window that looked out over the alley where the staff entered and left. He saw movement. Quick, violent, unmistakable. His wine glass froze halfway to his mouth. "Finish this later," he said, his voice deep and solid like an oath, and he was already on his feet, moving toward the back door before Carlo or Theo could register that he had moved at all. The alley smelled like rotting food and grease and August rain that had fallen hours ago, and when Lucian pushed through the door, what he saw was Marcus Webb, 48 years old, brutish, with fists like cinder blocks, driving his knuckles into the ribs of the woman in the black and white maid's uniform, the woman who had been cleaning his mansion for 8 months without him knowing her name, without him knowing anything except that he couldn't stop watching her. Her name was Cassandra. She tasted copper as Marcus's fist connected a second time, and she didn't scream because she'd learned that screaming only made it worse, only made him hit harder, only made his eyes light up with a kind of pleasure that made her skin crawl. His hand rose for a third blow. Lucian Russo's wrist flashed out and caught it mid-swing, and what happened next was something Marco and Theo would discuss in whispers for years to come. The most feared man in Chicago, the man who had built an entire empire on the foundation of avenging his father's death, the man who could order a person erased from the world with a single word, his hands were shaking. His jaw trembled like he was barely holding something catastrophic inside his own body, like if he opened his mouth even slightly, something lethal would escape. Marcus Webb looked at Lucian Russo and understood in that instant that he was about to die. Instead, Lucian simply held his wrist, squeezed until the bones ground together, and said nothing. Nothing at all. Marcus dropped to his knees, his face contorted with pain, and Lucian turned toward Cassandra, and there was something in his expression, something broken and desperate and ancient, that made her forget to breathe. "Can you walk?" His voice sounded like he'd swallowed gravel. She nodded, unable to speak, unable to do anything except notice that his suit jacket was open and his white shirt had the top buttons undone, revealing the broad expanse of his chest, and there was a gold chain around his neck that caught the light from the restaurant windows. Carlo and Theo appeared in the doorway, their hands automatically moving toward their jackets, but Lucian raised one finger and they stopped. "Get him out of Chicago," Lucian said, his voice now controlled, but that tremor was still there underneath, a string ready to snap. Tonight. I don't care where. But if he ever breathes the same air as her again, what happens will take weeks to finish. No one doubted him. Two of Lucian's men materialized from the shadows, men whose sole job was to make sure that certain kinds of problems disappeared, and they grabbed Marcus by the arms and dragged him toward the street where a black SUV sat idling, its engine rumbling like a sleeping panther about to wake. Cassandra watched it all happen like she was watching from inside a dream, like none of this was real, like at any moment she would wake up on her mattress in the dark and realize that $300,000 in 14 days and Marcus Webb's fists were still her actual life. Lucian stepped closer, and she could smell him, something expensive, like cedar and rain, and something darker underneath, something that reminded her of smoke and leather and danger, like a storm about to break. "Your name," he said. Not a question. "Cassandra." The word came out barely a whisper, trembling like a candle in the wind. He reached out and his fingers touched her chin, tilting her face up so he could see the bruises already blooming along her jaw like dark flowers. His hands, the ones that had just bent Marcus Webb's wrist, were gentle. Gentle in a way that made her start to cry, which was strange because she'd thought her tears had all evaporated years ago, but they came anyway, hot and without permission, and she couldn't stop them. Lucian Russo, standing in a dark alley in Chicago, held her face in his hands and said, "You are safe now. I swear this on everything I am, on the grave of my father, you are safe." And she believed him, even though believing him might be the most dangerous thing she'd ever done. Thunder rolled across the sky again, closer now, and somewhere far away, a car horn blared twice and then stopped. Inside the restaurant, Carlo looked at Theo, and they had the exact same thought. In 15 years of working for Lucian Russo, they had never seen him like this. They had never seen him touch anyone with gentleness. They had never seen his hands shake. They had never seen whatever it was moving behind his eyes now, burning like a flame that had been trapped in darkness and was suddenly, finally allowed to breathe. What neither of them understood was that Lucian Russo had been watching Cassandra for 8 months, ever since the night she'd come walking through the rain carrying his 7-year-old daughter Lily in her arms, the child bleeding from a gash on her forehead after a playground fall, and Cassandra had scooped her up without hesitation and brought her home through the storm like she was something precious, like Lily was her own child, like nothing else in the world mattered except getting that little girl to safety. He had glimpsed the scars on Cassandra's back one winter evening when she'd stumbled in the hallway and he'd caught her, and when she'd gasped in pain, he'd lifted her uniform to see the damage, and what he'd seen was a map of hell written in scar tissue and old bruises. And something had broken open inside him that night, something he'd kept carefully sealed since the day his father died, something dark and violent and utterly, completely devoted. But what Cassandra did not know, what she couldn't possibly know standing there in that alley with her jaw bruised and her ribs screaming with pain and $2 left in the world, was that her 14-day countdown had just changed into something else entirely. It had become the beginning of the end of everyone who had ever tried to destroy her. Before we continue, if this story is touching your heart, please drop a like and subscribe. Share it with someone who understands what it means to be invisible in plain sight. And now, let us go back to 14 days earlier, to the letter that started everything, to the moment when Cassandra Santos was still alone and still broken, still didn't know that salvation was moving toward her like a storm rolling across the Chicago skyline. 14 days earlier, the marble floor of Lucian Russo's Chicago mansion gleamed like a mirror, and Cassandra Santos knelt before it with a cloth the size of a child's hand, scrubbing in circles, her black and white maid's uniform hanging loose on her body like a flag that had given up trying to wave. 6 in the morning. The house slept above her, the mansion breathed in its sleep, the kind of sleep that costs more than her annual rent. She had been cleaning this floor for 8 months, 6 days a week, and in all that time, Lucian Russo had spoken to her exactly twice. "Good morning." And once, "The guest room on the 2nd floor needs attention." Her name had never crossed his lips. She finished the east corridor and moved to the foyer, where the chandelier cast light like shattered diamonds on the stone beneath her hands. The cloth moved in circles. Her knees throbbed. Her back, the old familiar ache that lived in the scar tissue, sent small lightning bolts down her spine with every movement, but she did not stop. Stopping was not something she could afford. At 7 o'clock, she locked herself in the supply closet, a narrow space behind the kitchen that smelled of lemon soap and rust. From her pocket, she withdrew 2 crumpled dollar bills and placed them on the shelf. $2. That was all. The rest of her money, $47.32, waited in an envelope under her apartment mattress, hidden from Marcus because Marcus had a way of finding things, of taking things, of deciding what belonged to him. She counted on her fingers anyway, as if the number might have changed overnight. 2 plus 47 was 49. $49 between her and the street. $49 between her daughter and vanishing. At noon, a letter arrived in a cream-colored envelope so expensive it seemed wrong to touch it. The Russo household manager, a woman named Patricia who treated Cassandra like she was made of air, handed it to her without comment. "For you," Patricia said, and returned to her phone call with someone named Margot about someone's summer house in the Hamptons. Cassandra's name was on the envelope. Cassandra Santos. Not Mrs. Webb. Not anyone's wife. Just her own name, spelled correctly, which meant nothing good. The lawyer's name was on the letterhead. Richard Sutherland, Esquire, representation for Webb family custody matter. The word swam in front of her eyes like fish swimming through dark water. Your custodial hearing has been scheduled for 14 days from receipt of this letter. The opposing party has retained legal counsel and submitted substantial financial documentation. You are required to demonstrate verified financial assets and stable living circumstances. Failure to provide proof of $300,000 in liquid or near-liquid assets will result in automatic custody transfer to Marcus Eugene Webb, as determined by the Family Court of Cook County. $300,000. She read it once. She read it again. She sat down on the edge of the washing machine and read it a third time, her hands shaking in a way she hadn't allowed them to shake in 3 years, not since the night she'd thrown clothes into a garbage bag and taken Elena and run. $300,000 in 14 days. She had $49. The mathematics of it was not complicated. The mathematics was impossible. The mathematics was the sound of a door slamming shut. Cassandra folded the letter and placed it inside her bra, against her ribs, where it felt like a knife between her bones. She finished her shift at 5 o'clock, collected her pay of $60 in cash, the only way they paid her, which meant no taxes, no records, no proof of anything, and took the bus home to the apartment she shared with her daughter in a neighborhood where the streetlights had stopped working 3 years ago and no one had bothered to replace them. Elena was 8 years old. She had dark eyes that looked directly at you when she spoke, and she drew pictures constantly, pictures of things the way she wanted them to be instead of the way they were. Right now, those pictures covered the walls of their apartment like a gallery for someone's heartbreak. A house with a garden. A kitchen with 2 adults standing side by side smiling. A woman and a child and a dog, all holding hands, all under a rainbow that curved from one corner of the page to the other. "Mama," Elena said when Cassandra came through the door, and Cassandra scooped her up even though her back screamed, even though her knees buckled, because this was the only thing that mattered anymore. This small person. This child who had no idea that her mother had $299,951 to find before a judge signed a piece of paper that would erase Cassandra from her life like she'd been written in pencil. That night, Cassandra did not sleep. She lay next to Elena in their bed, because there was only one bed and one of them had to sleep in it, and she stared at the ceiling and counted the hours until dawn. 14 days. $300,000. $49 in her name. A job that paid cash under the table. No college education. No credit. No proof that she existed except for the scars under her clothes and the child sleeping beside her. She had run from Marcus 3 years ago after the night he decided to use her as a canvas. That had been the final painting, the final masterpiece, the final time he would decorate her skin with his rage. She'd taken Elena and she'd run to the emergency room and she'd lied, the way women learn to lie, and said she'd fallen. Fallen down the stairs. Fallen against the counter. Fallen, fallen, fallen. When the hospital discharge papers came through, the domestic violence counselor had taken her hand and spoken her name the way you speak someone's name when you are talking to a real person instead of a problem, and she had given Cassandra a phone number written on a card and said, "When you are ready, we are here." But being ready and being ready were different things. Being ready was a luxury item. She had Elena. She had survived. That was supposed to be enough. She had not counted on Margaret Harrington. Margaret Harrington was 63 years old and rich in the way that stretched back generations, the kind of wealth that didn't need to explain itself or justify itself or even acknowledge that other people existed. She was Marcus Webb's cousin by marriage, and for reasons Cassandra did not fully understand, other than that women like Margaret Harrington simply decided things, Margaret had decided that Elena would be better off with Marcus. That Cassandra was unfit. That the custody agreement they'd reached quietly 3 years ago, the one that gave Cassandra full custody in exchange for her silence about Marcus's violence, needed to be re-examined in the light of recent developments, which apparently meant Marcus had found someone to testify that Cassandra was unstable, drug-addled, a flight risk, a mother who had abandoned her husband to pursue a lifestyle inconsistent with child-rearing. The machinery of the law began moving, and Margaret Harrington's money moved it faster. By 1 o'clock the next afternoon, the sun hung over Chicago like a stone, and the heat came off the pavement in waves that made the air shimmer like water. Cassandra walked to the mansion along the neighborhood streets, past the playground on the edge of Lincoln Park where the grass had turned brown and the metal of the equipment was hot enough to raise blisters, and that was when she heard the crying. It was the sound of a small child in genuine pain, not the performed crying of a child demanding candy, but the sound of someone genuinely hurt. Cassandra found her on the sidewalk, a girl no more than 7, with long dark hair and skin that went pale when she moved her leg. "Where does it hurt?" Cassandra knelt down, her maid's uniform spreading around her on the dirty concrete like a black and white flower. "My knee. I fell. I was jumping off the platform and I fell." The child's tears streamed down her face, and her left knee was bleeding, a thin line of red running down her shin. She wore expensive clothes, the kind of clothes that came from stores Cassandra had never entered, and her shoes cost more than Cassandra made in a week. "What is your name?" "Lily. Lily Russo." Cassandra's hand stilled for 1 second, one single second where her breath caught like it had been caught by something invisible. Russo. She had cleaned this child's toys off the marble floor of the mansion where she worked. She had folded tiny clothes into a dresser made of real wood that came from somewhere important. She had never seen the child, though. The child's nanny collected her, a woman named Diane who spoke in short sentences and never made eye contact. But right now, Lily Russo was hurt, and Cassandra was there, and the mathematics of that was simple. She took off her own scarf, a thin piece of cotton she had washed 100 times, and wrapped it around the child's knee, tying it carefully. "We need to get you home. Does that sound right?" Lily nodded, tears still streaming. "I live over there," she pointed, and Cassandra scooped her up without thinking, without calculating risk or consequence or the fact that she was about to carry someone else's child, someone important's child, through the streets of Chicago with blood on them both. The mansion was 3 blocks away, and Cassandra walked them with Lily in her arms, the child's weight against her chest, her small arms around Cassandra's neck. The afternoon was so hot it felt like walking through soup, and the sky was beginning to darken at the edges, the clouds moving in like something with intentions. "What is your name?" Lily asked. "Cassandra." "That is a very long name. You can call me Vivi if you want." "I like Vivi better." Lily rested her head on Cassandra's shoulder, and her arm tightened around Cassandra's neck, and somewhere in Cassandra's chest, something that had been frozen for 3 years began to crack. The mansion's front door opened before she could knock. Lucian Russo stood in the doorway, and in that second, Cassandra understood why people feared him without needing to be told. He was tall, 6'2" at least, and built like a man who had been carved from something harder than flesh. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and she could see the dark hair on his forearms and the gold watch that cost more than her entire yearly salary. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they moved across her face with the kind of attention that made her feel like he was reading the answers to questions she hadn't heard yet. "Lily." His voice was like thunder. Like something dangerous held very still. I fell at the playground, Lily said. Vivi helped me. She brought me home. He looked at Cassandra, really looked at her, not the way the household staff looked at her, not like she was furniture in a maid's outfit, but like she was a person with a face and a name and a body that occupied space. Thank you, he said, and his voice was different now, something softer underneath it, something almost human. What is your name? Cassandra Santos. I work in your household. 6 days a week. I clean. I know who you are. He reached out and took Lily from her arms, and Cassandra felt the sudden absence of the child's weight against her chest like a small death. Thank you for bringing her home safe. She nodded. She had no words. She stepped backward, 1 step, 2 steps, and his eyes followed her until she turned and walked away from the mansion, from Lily, from the moment when something had shifted in the space between them like a door opening. What Cassandra did not know was that Lily Russo had decided in that moment that Vivi belonged to her forever. What she did not know was that Lucian had seen her scars. What she did not know was that in exactly 8 hours, her entire life was going to change. 2 days after Lily came home bleeding from the playground, Marcus Webb learned exactly where Cassandra Santos was hiding. The industrial kitchen of Lucian Russo's mansion stretched 40 feet, all stainless steel and marble countertops that caught the afternoon light like mirrors. Cassandra stood at the sink, silver polish smudged on her fingertips, buffing a serving spoon until it gleamed. The work was mindless, repetitive, the kind of task that let her think about nothing but the rhythm of cloth against metal. She did not hear the service entrance open. The first thing she knew was his shadow falling across the counter. Marcus Webb stood in the doorway, his shirt untucked, his face unshaven, wearing the expression of a man who had been drinking since morning. He was 48 but looked older, hard years lived badly, cruelty etched into the lines around his mouth. Behind him, the kitchen staff had vanished, which meant he had shown them something that made them leave quickly and quietly. "Hello, Cassie," he said. Her entire body went rigid. The spoon clattered into the sink. "How did you get in here?" Her voice came out barely a whisper. "Margaret has friends everywhere. The security guard, he knows someone who knows someone. Money opens doors, doesn't it? You of all people should know that." He moved toward her slowly, each step deliberate, the way a predator moves when there is no rush. "You think you can hide here? Behind some rich man's money? You think working for Lucian Russo protects you?" She backed against the counter. Cold marble pressed into her spine. "Margaret Harrington owns you, Cassie. She owns the judge. She owns your lawyer. She owns the entire courthouse." His voice dropped lower. "No amount of scrubbing floors will save you. Not this time." He grabbed her wrist. His fingers dug in, squeezing until her hand went numb, until sharp pain shot up her arm. 7 days, he said. "Then Elena comes home with me. The judge will sign the order. Margaret's already confirmed it. You have nothing. You are nothing. And in 7 days, your daughter belongs to me." He squeezed harder. She gasped, tears flooding her vision. Then he released her, stepping back, smoothing his shirt like he had just finished a polite conversation about the weather. He turned and walked out through the service entrance without another word, leaving her standing alone in the kitchen, her hand throbbing, her breath coming in ragged gasps. A serving spoon lay on the marble floor where it had fallen. The sound of it hitting the stone echoed through the empty kitchen like a gunshot in silence. Upstairs, in his office on the 3rd floor, Lucian Russo heard it. He was reviewing contracts when the sound reached him, not loud, but distinctive, the metallic ring of silver against marble, muffled by distance and walls but somehow cutting through the quiet of the afternoon. He stopped reading. His pen went still. For 15 seconds, maybe 20, he simply listened to the absence of sound that followed, the kitchen going silent in a way that was not natural. He made a mental note to ask Cassandra if she was all right. That evening, his nanny called in sick. The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, knocked on his office door with apologies and a request, Could Cassandra perhaps read to Lily before bed? Just this once? The child was particular about her routines, and the new nanny was still a stranger. Of course, Lucian said, though something in his chest tightened at the thought of Cassandra in Lily's room, in that space that was his alone with his daughter. He watched from the hallway as she climbed the stairs in her black and white uniform, her shoulders curved inward slightly, moving like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. She knocked on Lily's door softly. "Come in," Lily called, and Lucian heard the brightness in his daughter's voice change, become something different, not quite a child's voice anymore, but something older, something that recognized love. Cassandra sat on the edge of Lily's bed, the book small in her hands. Lily was already under the covers, her stuffed rabbit tucked against her chest, her dark eyes, the same dark eyes as her father, fixed on Cassandra's face. "Once upon a time," Cassandra began, her voice different now too, softer, carrying a gentleness that made Lucian's throat tighten, "there was a princess who was very brave." She read for 5 minutes. Then Lily interrupted. "Do you have a little girl?" The question was casual, innocent, the way children asked the questions that destroyed adults. Cassandra's voice faltered. "Yes. Her name is Elena. She is 6 years old." Lily considered this with the absolute seriousness of childhood logic. "Then you should be our mama. Because Daddy needs someone and you need someone and I need a mama." She said it like she was stating a fact about the weather. "You saved me. That means you're my person now." Cassandra's eyes filled with tears. She closed the book gently, kissed Lily's forehead, a small, tender gesture that lasted less than a second, and stood up. "Good night, sweetheart," she whispered. She left before her voice broke completely, before she could let the child see her come apart. In the hallway, she did not see Lucian standing in the shadows of his office doorway, every muscle in his body gone perfectly still. He had heard every word. He had seen her bend down and kiss his daughter like Lily was her own child, like that gesture cost her something precious and necessary. He stood there long after she disappeared down the servants' stairs, his hand pressed against the doorframe, his jaw tight. The next morning, Lucian found Lily's drawing in his desk drawer. He had not put it there. He did not remember ever seeing it before, but when he opened the drawer to retrieve his reading glasses, there it was, a piece of pale blue construction paper, covered in the careful, crooked lines of a 7-year-old's art. 3 stick figures holding hands. The figure on the left was tall and labeled Daddy in blocky letters. The figure on the right was small and labeled Emmy. And in the middle, smaller than the daddy but taller than the child, was a figure with a black line around the middle, a dress, or an attempt at one, labeled Mama. Below all of it, in the messy handwriting that was just beginning to understand how letters connected, Lily had written, "Our family." Lucian stared at it for 5 full minutes without moving. The coffee on his desk grew cold. The morning light shifted across the paper, catching on the crayon marks, making them luminous. Carlo and Theo entered without knocking. They had always entered without knocking, and Lucian had never corrected them, with updates on a shipment dispute that had erupted overnight in the warehouse district. They stopped dead in the doorway. Their boss was holding a child's drawing. His jaw was slack. His eyes were wet. "Boss?" Carlo asked carefully, the way you might approach an animal you were not sure was friendly. Lucian did not answer. He simply folded the drawing carefully along its creases, creating a neat rectangle of construction paper and crayons and the devastating simplicity of a child's declaration. He opened his wallet, Italian leather, cost more than most people's monthly rent, and slid the drawing inside, behind his identification, where it would be closest to his heart. "Proceed with the briefing," he said, his voice steady, his expression returning to stone. But Carlo saw his hands shake as he folded the wallet closed. That night, humid August air pressed down on Chicago like a weight, thick and suffocating. The sky had turned the color of old bruises. Cassandra worked late in the second-floor library, a room the size of a small apartment, filled with leather-bound books that smelled like vanilla and thyme. She reached for a high shelf, standing on a stepladder, polishing the gilt lettering on a collection of first editions that probably cost more than her entire life. Her sleeve rode up. She winced. Marcus had found her yesterday outside Elena's school, had shoved her against her car hard enough to crack the window, hard enough to reopen a scar that had finally started to fade. The skin on her inner arm screamed with fresh pain. The ladder shifted beneath her. She lost her balance, reaching out blindly for stability that was not there. Lucian caught her from behind, his hand closing around her waist, steadying her before she could fall. She gasped, her entire body going rigid in his grip. When he released her, she was trembling. She yanked her sleeve down, but not before he saw them, the scars on her forearm, the edge of what continued underneath her uniform, what continued across her back, what he had glimpsed once before and now understood was a map of 8 years of violence. His hands froze. His breathing stopped. "Who did this to you?" His voice was barely audible, like something dangerous held very still. "It's nothing. I'm fine." She turned away, pulling the ladder closer to the shelf, moving like she could climb back into the work and hide there. "Cassandra!" He said her name like a question and a statement and a vow all at once. "Who?" Something in the way he said it, the first time he had used her name without the protective distance of formality, broke something in her that she had sealed shut 3 years ago. She sat down in one of the leather chairs. The library smelled like old books and thunder rolling in from the sky. The distant rumble grew louder, closer, the storm moving toward the city like something with intention. "Marcus Webb," she said. "My ex-husband. We were married for 8 years. For 8 years, he hit me every time I looked at another man. Every time I spoke too loud. Every time I breathed wrong. When I finally left, he followed me to every job, every apartment. He would find me. He always found me. And now he's fighting for custody of Elena through Margaret Harrington, who hates me because I divorced her favorite client." Her voice cracked. "I need $300,000 in verified assets in 7 days or the judge signs Elena over to him permanently. I have $2 in my pocket. $2. That is all I have." She repeated the number 3 times, each one heavier than the last. $300,000. $300,000. $300,000. "The judge is in Margaret's pocket," Cassandra continued. "The lawyer is in her pocket. Everything is in her pocket. And Marcus, he'll hurt Elena the way he hurt me. He'll teach her that love means pain. And I can't," her voice broke entirely. "I can't protect her if I don't have the money. Why would you even care? I'm nobody. I'm just your maid." Lucian leaned forward. The leather chair creaked beneath his weight. "You saved my daughter," he said. "You carried her home in a thunderstorm. Lily calls you Mama when she thinks I cannot hear her. You are not nobody." His voice cracked on the last word. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, tapping against the library windows like fingers asking to come inside. Lightning flickered across the sky, illuminating the rows of books, the 2 figures sitting across from each other in a space that had suddenly become very small. "I will handle this," Lucian said. "And then, you are not alone anymore." In the hallway outside the library, Carlo and Theo stood with their ears pressed against the oak door, hearing fragments of words, hearing their boss speak with a tenderness that 15 years of loyalty had never witnessed. They exchanged a look, brief, shocked, the kind of look that said everything had changed and neither of them understood how or why. Later that night, they would tell the crew, "In 15 years of working for Lucian Russo, we have never seen him like this." 3 days before the custody hearing, Marcus Webb walked into Russo's upscale Italian restaurant on North Michigan Avenue without knowing he was stepping into a trap that had already been set. Margaret Harrington followed behind him, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown clock. They were seated in a private booth near the back, candlelight flickering across their faces, celebrating what they believed was already theirs. Cassandra was working the evening shift. The restaurant manager had called her that morning, they were short-staffed, and she needed the money desperately. Every dollar mattered now. Every single dollar. She had taken the job without knowing that Lucian Russo dined here every Wednesday at 7 o'clock, always in the same booth, always with a view of the entire dining room. She approached their table with water glasses. Her hands did not shake. Not yet. Marcus's eyes widened when he recognized her. Well, well, he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. Still scrubbing floors, Cassie? He was 48 years old, his face flushed from expensive wine, his suit tailored but his smile cruel. Or is it scrubbing toilets now? Margaret looked up from her menu, delighted. Her blonde hair was swept back perfectly. She wore diamonds at her throat, real ones, the kind Cassandra would never own. Tell me, Margaret said, her voice deliberately loud so nearby diners would hear, do you have the $300,000 yet? 3 days left, is it not? She smiled like a blade wrapped in ice. I do hope you are not too disappointed when Elena signs her custody agreement with her father. Cassandra set down the water glasses. Her hands trembled but her voice remained steady. I will be right back with your wine. Marcus grabbed her wrist. His fingers dug into her skin, the same way they always had. Answer her. Let go of me, Cassandra said. Margaret laughed, a sound like broken glass. Pathetic. This is what Elena's mother is. A woman who cleans toilets. A woman with $2 to her name. Elena will be so much better off with Marcus. A child needs stability, not a mother who scrubs other people's filth off marble floors. Every word was designed to destroy. Every word found its target. Cassandra pulled her wrist free and turned away. She did not cry. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus 8 years ago. She walked to the kitchen, set down her tray, and stood very still in the cold storage room for exactly 60 seconds. What Cassandra did not know was that 15 feet away, hidden behind a decorative partition, Lucian Russo sat in his usual booth. His food lay untouched on the table in front of him. Carlo sat across from him. They had both heard every word. The color drained from Carlo's face. In 15 years of working for Lucian Russo, he had witnessed violence, betrayal, and the systematic destruction of his enemies. But he had never seen his boss's expression change the way it did in that moment. It was as if something fundamental had shifted inside him, something that had been frozen since the day his father died now suddenly thawing into terrible purpose. Tell me everything, Lucian said quietly. Every detail about Marcus Webb. Every detail about Margaret Harrington. I want their lives laid bare before me. Carlo nodded and was gone before Lucian finished speaking. That night, Cassandra sat alone in her studio apartment on the south side. The walls were peeling paint the color of old bruises. The radiator hissed and groaned but produced almost no heat. Elena lay asleep in the only bed, curled into a ball, her thumb in her mouth the way she always did when she was afraid. Rain pounded against the single window like fists demanding entry. The temperature had dropped. Humid August was giving way to something colder. Cassandra sat on the floor with her back against the wall. The scars running across her shoulders and down her spine ached in the cold. She had counted her money 3 times that day, hoping the total would change. It did not. $2. The custody hearing was in 3 days. 3 days to somehow prove she was stable, capable, worth keeping her daughter. 3 days to find $300,000 from absolutely nowhere. She had no options left. No credit. No collateral. No family who could help. She had burned every bridge that had ever existed. On the bathroom counter, a bottle of sleeping pills sat exactly where Marcus had left it 6 months ago. 40 pills. More than enough. She had thought about it before, late at night, when Elena was asleep and the silence pressed down like a stone on her chest. One tiny thing had always stopped her: Elena needed her mother. That night, sitting in the cold and dark, even that felt like it might not be enough anymore. At 3:16 in the morning, Cassandra's phone buzzed. An unknown number. She almost deleted the message without reading it. But something made her look. Check your bank account. Her phone was old and slow. The bank app took forever to load. When it finally opened, she stared at the screen until her vision blurred and reformed and blurred again. $300,000. Deposited. Verified. Real. A second message appeared. The hearing is handled. Do not go alone. Wear the blue dress. You are not alone anymore. Lr. Cassandra sat on the floor of her apartment in the cold darkness and cried in a way she had not cried in 8 years. Not the small, careful tears of survival. These were the broken, gasping sobs of someone who had learned, finally, that drowning was optional. The custody hearing took place in a sterile courtroom on the 14th floor of the Daily Center. Judge Patricia Morrison sat elevated above everyone else, her black robes making her look like a dark angel. Cassandra arrived in her blue dress, carrying the bank statement in a folder. Her hands were steady now. Marcus and Margaret sat on the opposite side with their expensive lawyer, a man whose suit cost more than Cassandra's entire monthly rent. They were smiling. They had won this already, at least, that is what their expressions said. Judge Morrison adjusted her glasses. Ms. Santos, the opposing counsel requires proof of financial stability. Do you have documentation? Cassandra stood and handed over the statement. The courtroom was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic 14 stories below. Marcus's lawyer examined it. The color drained from his face. Your Honor, this wire transfer appears to have arrived overnight. There is no documentation of its origin. This is clearly fraudulent. It is verified, the judge said, her voice flat. I have confirmed it with the bank personally. The requirement is met. Ms. Santos has demonstrated financial capability to provide for her daughter. Margaret leaned forward, her voice venomous. We will appeal. We will destroy you. Your daughter will never forget what you did. But the words had no power now. The judge banged her gavel once, hard. Custody remains with the mother. Case closed. Marcus stood so fast his chair fell backward with a crack like a gunshot. Security moved in immediately, their hands ready. Margaret hissed something at Cassandra as they were escorted out, but Cassandra did not hear it. She was thinking about Elena. Elena in her school uniform. Elena calling her mama when she thought no one was listening. Elena safe. Outside the courthouse, the Chicago wind bit through her coat. She looked at her phone. A text, tonight. Be ready. What Margaret and Marcus did not know was that Lucian Russo had spent the last 3 days methodically gathering evidence. Carlo and Theo had infiltrated their emails, their financial records, their private conversations. They found everything, 8 years of documented abuse in messages Marcus had sent to Margaret, threats sent to Cassandra's phone, evidence that Margaret Harrington had paid off the judge's campaign manager, proof that the original custody petition had been built on perjured testimony and falsified documents. At 11:06 that night, 12 men in black moved like ghosts through Marcus Webb's apartment building on the West Loop. Tactical precision. Radio silent. They had a key, the building manager owed Lucian a favor, and favors were always collected. Marcus was dragged from his bed. He screamed and screamed and screamed, but the soundproofing was excellent. Carlo stood over him while the other men photographed everything, the abuse documentation, the threat messages, the financial records proving fraud. Lucian Russo sends his regards, Carlo said quietly. Marcus collapsed to his knees, trembling like a cornered animal backed into a corner with no exit. Please. Please, I will disappear. I will leave Chicago. You will never see me again. The footage uploaded in real time. By midnight, it was streaming everywhere. The next morning, federal agents arrived at Margaret Harrington's mansion at dawn. The Gold Coast address, the marble foyer, the paintings that cost more than houses, none of it mattered. She answered the door in a silk robe, furious. Do you know who I am? The lead agent handed her an arrest warrant. Margaret Harrington, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, witness tampering, and bribery of a public official. Behind them, news vans were already pulling up. Someone had tipped off every major outlet in Chicago simultaneously. The footage of Marcus's apartment, the documented abuse, the financial trail connecting everything to Margaret Harrington, it all went live at the exact same moment. Viral within an hour. 2 million views by morning. By the end of the week, every news outlet in the country had run the story. She was perp-walked in handcuffs. The cameras caught her mouth open in shock, her carefully constructed reputation disintegrating in real time like a building being demolished from the inside out. Her own high society friends saw her arrested on the morning news. Her lawyer would not return her calls. Her accounts were frozen. The foundation she chaired, the board she sat on, the charities that bore her name, all of them erased her by noon. Justice is not death. Death would be too quick, too easy, too merciful. Justice is systematic destruction. Justice is public humiliation. Justice is the absolute certainty that they will never touch her, never threaten her, never hurt anyone she loves again. Marcus Webb received 40 years in federal prison. Margaret Harrington received 35 years. The silence after was different from the silence before. 1 week after the federal hearing, the silence in Lucian Russo's mansion felt different. Not peaceful. Not resolved. The kind of silence that comes after a storm has passed but the sky has not yet decided whether to clear or darken again. Cassandra Santos stood at the service entrance, her hand on the doorframe, uncertain whether she still belonged here. Her black and white uniform hung in her apartment, clean and pressed. She had not worn it since the night Marcus came with his threats. Since the night Lucian found her bleeding on the kitchen tiles and something broke open inside him that could never be fully sealed. The housekeeper appeared around the corner, her face unreadable. "Mr. Russo wants to see you in his office." Cassandra's stomach dropped like a stone into black water. She climbed the marble stairs, each step deliberate, her hand trailing along the banister she had polished 1,000 times. The third-floor hallway stretched long and quiet. Afternoon light slanted through the windows, cutting sharp lines across the hardwood. She reached the mahogany door, knocked once. "Come in." His voice was the same, deep and solid like an oath, but something underneath it had shifted. She opened the door and stepped into the office where she had scrubbed floors for 8 months, invisible in her uniform, and where Lucian Russo had built his empire in silence. He sat behind his desk, immense and controlled, but his hands were still. On the surface in front of him, spread like evidence, was a child's drawing. Stick figures. 2 tall, 1 small. Rendered in purple, crayon and green and blue. "Our family," written across the top in Lily's careful 7-year-old letters. Cassandra's breath caught in her throat. "Sit," Lucian said. She sat in the chair across from him, hands folded in her lap. The silence stretched between them like a living thing. She could hear the city outside his windows, distant traffic, a siren somewhere blocks away, the hum of Chicago indifferent to what happened in rooms like this. "Why did you help me?" she asked finally. Her voice barely a whisper, like a candle in the wind. "I told you." He leaned back slightly, studying her face. "You saved my daughter. And Lily loves you." He slid the drawing across the desk toward her. She looked at it, really looked at it, and something inside her shattered in the best way. 3 figures holding hands. A house with a door and 4 windows. Lily's careful signature at the bottom. And beneath the image, in her daughter's innocent handwriting, "Our family. Our family. Our family," the phrase repeated over and over until it became a prayer. "She drew this 2 weeks ago," Lucian continued. His dark eyes never left her face. "She has been calling you Mama for months. Not to your face. Only when she thinks no one is listening. But I have heard her. In the hallway. In the garden. In her dreams, talking to you before sleep." He stood, moved around the desk, his movements controlled and measured. "I have been watching you for 8 months, Cassandra. Since the day you carried my bleeding daughter home in the rain. Since the moment you chose her safety over your own." She did not move. And when I saw the scars on your back that night in the hallway. When I heard what Marcus Webb did to you. When Margaret Harrington sat in this office and laughed about destroying you, his voice broke. A single crack in something that had never broken before. He stopped, collected himself, but the damage was done. She had heard it. She would never unhear it. I built this entire empire on vengeance, he said quietly. My father was murdered by a rival when I was 16 years old. I watched from inside a closet while they shot him in the foyer of our home. I built everything you see, every business, every connection, every alliance, to make sure no one could ever hurt my family again. But somewhere along the way, between the guns and the money and the fear, I forgot what family actually means. He was standing in front of her now, close enough that she could feel the heat coming from his body, close enough to see the vulnerability in his eyes that no one else in Chicago would ever see. Lily wants you as her mama, he said. I want you as, he stopped. The words would not come. Some things were too large for language. Cassandra stood slowly. You broke down in that alley, she said. It was not a question. Carlo told me. The most feared man in Chicago, standing in the rain, shaking. He nodded. I have killed men without flinching. I have ordered operations that took lives. But seeing him hurt you, seeing what he had done to you, I could not. His hands trembled. The same hands that gave orders to 12 men in black suits. The same hands that built an empire. Trembling like they belonged to the broken boy he had been at 16. She reached out and took his hand. His palm was warm, his grip careful, as if she might shatter at any moment. I am not afraid of you, she said. I know, he whispered. The moment stretched between them, weighted with everything that had led here, the poverty, the abuse, the fear, the night she saved his daughter, the moment he saw her scars and something inside him finally cracked open to let the light in. Then she said, I need to do this the right way. For Elena. For Lily. For me. She took a breath. If this is real, we do it right. He nodded, understanding immediately. Whatever you need. I need time, she continued. I need to not be your maid. I need to be someone who chooses this, not someone you saved. You are not someone I saved, he said. You are someone I chose. But I understand. He released her hand slowly, as if it cost him something. Take all the time you need. But know this, you and Elena have a home here as long as you want it. No conditions. No expectations. Just a home. She smiled for the first time since walking into this office. It transformed her face, made her look like a different woman, one who had never known poverty, never known fear, never known that love could arrive on a summer afternoon carrying a child in its arms. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. Cassandra. She looked back. You were never nobody, he said. But what she did not know as she walked down those marble stairs was that Lily was listening at the door, had heard every word, and would spend the rest of the day planning a wedding that would not happen for 6 months but would be, in her 7-year-old mind, absolutely inevitable. 6 months later, on Christmas Eve, Lucian's mansion blazed with light and sound. Cassandra walked through the front door this time, not the service entrance, wearing a blue dress that Lucian had bought her last month. She was no longer the maid. She had been taking business classes, learning Lucian's legitimate operations, rebuilding herself from the ground up. Elena ran to her immediately, her voice bright as bells. Mama. Mama, Lily says we are going to be real sisters. Is that true? Is that true? Cassandra scooped her daughter up, held her close, looked up and saw Lucian watching from the stairs. He was wearing a dark suit, expensive, tailored, the kind of suit that cost more than she used to make in a month. But it was his expression that stopped her, the way he looked at her, completely undone, the most feared man in Chicago rendered helpless by the simple sight of her standing in his home, in his life, in his future. Later, after the girls were asleep, they sat in the library where she had first told him about Marcus, about the abuse, about the $300,000 she had to find in 2 weeks or lose everything. I am ready, she said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. His hands did not tremble this time. He opened it. A ring, simple, elegant, nothing ostentatious, because Cassandra had never wanted ostentatious. She had only ever wanted safe. She had only ever wanted home. Lily helped me pick it out 3 months ago, he said. She has been carrying it in her pocket, asking when I would give it to you. She has a timeline for our lives that I have been following without even knowing it. Cassandra laughed and cried simultaneously, the two emotions indistinguishable. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. The wedding was small, private, held in the mansion's garden in spring when the flowers had finally remembered how to bloom. Lily and Elena were flower girls, dropping petals in patterns only they understood. Carlo and Theo stood as witnesses, and when the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," Lucian cupped Cassandra's face with hands that once built an empire on vengeance and now trembled with something infinitely softer, infinitely more dangerous, the tender vulnerability of a man who had learned to love. The guests cheered. The girls tackled them both in a hug that dissolved everyone into laughter. Later, at the reception in Russo's upscale Italian restaurant, the same place where Marcus and Margaret Harrington had once mocked her, where they had laughed about her poverty, Cassandra stood in the private booth in the back and looked around at her new family. Lucian wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder, and whispered, "I told you. You were never nobody." She turned in his arms. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. He kissed her forehead, then her lips, then her forehead again. The three of them, Cassandra, Lucian, Lily, and Elena, sat together in the candlelight, exactly like the drawing that started it all. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Drop a comment telling us what you felt when you saw Lucian break down in that office. Subscribe because tomorrow, we have another story that will break your heart and put it back together. Sometimes the most feared man in the world is just waiting for someone brave enough to see the broken boy underneath. Sometimes the invisible woman is the one everyone has been searching for. And sometimes love finds you in the last place you ever expected, on your knees scrubbing someone else's floors, when a little girl decides you are already family. Thank you for staying with us. We will see you again tomorrow.